Alright, so today I'm going to show you guys how to pass data between different view controllers. First, just create a simple app, do file, new project, and just create a new project like as so you would do file, new project, or just open your Xcode and name it whatever you want. I just like saying a simple app and then just press next and name it whatever you want. So then you should get something like this here. First, go to your main view controller and just rename this to view controller A. And let's go to your main storyboard. Here you have your view controller here, and let's change that to view controller A. Change the class to view controller A. Also, let's give it a storyboard ID called view controller A. What I like to do is I'm gonna color code this. So go to here and let's change this background to something like green, for example. Let's add some UI elements to this. First, I'm gonna add a label to represent our message between the different controllers. So I'll just call this right now message. And then I'll add some constraint to this. I'm gonna do 50 from the safe area, 20, 20, and let's center our message. Boom. And then I also want to add a input field so we can send data between the view controllers. So let's add some constraint to that. Let's do 50 on top. Add one more. I'll do 20 from the side. Just like that. And one last thing for this view controller. Let's add a button and add some constraint to that. I'm gonna do 50 and 20, 20. There we go. And let's call our button. Let's give it a name. Let's just call it send to B. To view controller B. Alright, now that we have our first view controller, let's create our second view controller. First, let's create a class to represent the second view controller. We have our first one here. Let's copy this and create another class to represent the second one. So here I'm going to add a new file, Swift file, and just call this. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. Controller B, and create. This is called controller A. This should also be called controller A. Alright, controller B. This is what we just created. Let's move this here so we can just looks better. And let's paste the code from the previous view controller and change that to B. So now we have view controller A, which represents the view controller A in our storyboard. And then if you go to view controller B, it should be similar. Now let's create a view controller B. Here you have our view controller A, represented by the class view controller A, storyboard ID view controller A. So let's create a B. So go here, show library, and just look up view controller. There you go. And let's call this view controller B. Yep, just like that. And let's not forget to add the ID for that. I like to keep the ID name similar to the class name or the same. And I'm just going to give this a background that's different so we know that the navigation works. So let's give it a Red background, why not? Alright, so we also want to add the same thing here like we did here. A label, a text input, and a button. Let's go to show library again. Let's add a label. Add some constraint to that label. Let's put that in the center. Add some constraint. Let's do 50 on the top. 20. 20. Add those 3 constraints. Let's add a input text input field. A text field. Let's make it center also. And let's do 50 from the top. 20. 20. Boom, just like that. And one last thing. A button. Yep, just like that. Add some strength to that. I like to do 50 on top, 20 from the edge. There you go. And let's call this send to A. And there we go. Now let's go back to our classes. Split your screen by pressing this so you can have control A and control B like so. What we want to do is we want to connect this UI elements like messages and input text field and the send button to our class. So what we want to do is hold control. Well, of course, select your element first, hold control, then drag it up here. I'm just going to call this message label like so. Done. Same thing with this one. I'll call this message input. And then let's give an action to this button. We want it to do something when we press on it. Let's see, call it send button action. Alright, so now that we have that, we want to do something when this button is pressed. So what we want to do is we want to go to view controller, to the next view controller, which is the view controller B. So what we want to do is instantiate view controller VC, which stands for view controller, storyboard dot instantiate view controller identifier. And remember, the second view controller we give it a name just same as the class view controller B. So give that a string, call it view controller B, just like so, and cast it as view controller B. Alright, let's change the presentation style to full screen. And then present it. Alright, to present it. And let's just test it to see if it works. So here I'm going to test on a simulator and see if it will work. So here is my simulator. Share the screen here. Boom. Control A. And you can tell it worked. So let's go back to view controller B. In controller B, we want to do the same thing. We want to connect all those UI elements to view controller B. So let's select the element, hold control, then drag it to your class that represents that view controller. Here I'm just going to call it the same thing, message label, just like in the other view controller. Same thing with this one, select and just put it here and call it input, message input. Now let's connect the button to our class. So again, hold Control, drag it to our class, and let's call that send action. There we go. In this class, we want to add an additional field called text that we want our first view controller to be able to manipulate. That way we can see the message from the first view controller. Let's just call it. Let's just give it a variable. Call it text, and just give it an optional string, like so. In the reviewDidLoad method below, let's do an if statement. If text is not nil, then we update our message label to text. Okay, there we go. And then let's create a completion handler also here to pass data back to the first view controller. So just like this. Let's so this is optional. So this completion handler will take in string optional and return void. So we want it to return void. This is what is called passing data through closure. So in this case, we have a variable called completion handler, which gets called inside another function. Takes a string optional and returns nothing. So in our send button action here for your second view controller, we want to in the second view controller, we want to dismiss ourselves, but also call the completion handler here. And in the completion handler, we want to pass in our message input text. That way, this text gets sent. This text get passed into this function. And let's dismiss true. No. Alright. So let's go back to the first view controller. And the first view controller, what we want to do is we want to when we instantiate the second view controller, we want to, before we present it, we want to access the completion handler in the second view controller. So if you see that completion handler equal, and let's do text in, and then here is where we'll update our label with the message we get back from the second view controller. Update our message label just like so. Let's just capture itself explicitly like that. And let's test it again. So what our code is doing here is, in the first view controller, when you press the send button right here, for example B, it's going to update. Hold on, I have an update. Give me a second here. I forgot to do one more thing. So here, we also want to update the text the text property of the second view controller. So vc dot view controller dot text equal message, not message label, message input. So before we go to the next view controller, we want to update the message. We want to update the text of the view controller. Here we create a second view controller, right? And then we update the text property to our input text, and then we access its completion handler, and whatever we get back, we update our message label. That's what we do in the first view controller. In the second view controller, here, what we're doing is we're just calling. We have this completion handler variable, and then before we dismiss, we just pass our message input text into the completion handler, which view controller A will get and update its label. So let's run this and see what happens. So the message I put here will be seen in view controller B, for example, and there you go. And then the message I put here will be handled by the completion handler and sent back to A, and there you go, A. So that's how you pass data through between different view controllers. There's several ways. There's you can use closer, which is what I did here, to pass some data back from B to A. Or you can use something called notification center. There's several ways, but this is the simpler way I'm trying to I experimented with, and I just want to share this with you guys. So if you have any questions, please leave any comment, or don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.